Did you attend the plenary? People were complaining that OAUTH has 3 slots. We can reduce the number of slots and do more inter meetings. I will ask the group. You too? What a coincidence. No, I just heard people telling me that, oh, they said, oh, Dad, you didn't attend the plenary.
So there's a bunch of increments. Not a huge WebAuthn is W3C. Yeah, right. Weird. So like, how do you do zero? It's a family of cooperation.
Guys, we now have to start. I almost forgot. It's 1 minute past. Okay. Okay. So let me click through.
Just keeping him company.
Perfect. Yeah. So area director, me, Rifat, remote. And this is now our 3rd day, which brings me to the point that some people were complaining yesterday at the plenary that OAUTH has so many meetings. We will do another sort of poll, Rifat and I, to check whether you are happy with this setup. We can switch to, like, we went to this 3 session per IETF meeting setup because some people were complaining that we had only 2 meetings and then side meetings, so they were unhappy about the side meetings, and they had many other things scheduled, and so there were conflicts. Then we went to this setup, and people now complain as well. We can also, I think the only other option I see is we have 2 sessions, but then do more intra meetings. Of course, some other people were going to complain as well, but we'll basically try everything out and then go back to where we came from.
I think interims would be a good option.
Okay.
For maybe to get you down to 2 meetings instead of 3 meetings. Or to put you on Friday.
Yeah, let's try that. We've had meetings on Friday, so.
Yeah, I'm just shocked you weren't on Friday.
Okay, so so here's the agenda. We have Brian talking about SD chart and SD chart VC. So we have enough time for discussions and to go into the details and so on. Then we have these one-time confirmation tokens and one-time auth tokens. We have 2 presentations on those. So, and we also have an agenda or agenda bashing request to also continue the discussion on the client ID, which we did at a previous meeting, to continue that because there we ran out of time and we have some spare time. So I would like to do that. Since that fits from the order, what I would like to do is we do the SD chart, then we have a discussion about the client ID, and then we do the token thing. And we have Dimitri and Neil talking about those, so it will be interesting. Any objection to that? Oh, Justin. And yeah, please scan the QR code so you can participate and go to the microphone and so on and so on.
Hi, Justin Richer, and audio guys haven't figured out how loud I am yet. But in any case, I'm not objecting to specifically the schedule, but I think that one thing that this group needs to genuinely consider is that we've kind of grown too big and we have just too many things in flight at a time. And reorganization of a working group and its items is something the IETF has done before with success. I think that we have several sort of major paths of work happening in the group that are clustered around different topics, that I think that there is a very real possibility of us doing that because the community is going to follow the work. It's not if we sort of move stuff around to sort of help the schedule and relieve the pressure that way, that doesn't mean that it's just going to like be chopped off and die. So anyway, I wanted to raise that as a possibility that we should genuinely consider as a community.
Yeah, and we did talk about that before.
We should talk about it again.
Okay. Good. Do we have meeting minute takers? Can someone take meeting minutes? We need 2 people ideally. Well, we need 2 people just to capture the decisions. Peter is one. Oh, and Mike Jenkins, thank you. That's excellent. Okay, Brian, jump up here. Are you driving there?
What works best?
Okay.
I'm not very good with. I'll do it.
That-
I guess. Do I request?
You can do that. Yeah.
We can just give it to you.
Yeah. But you need to request.
If you want that, you can hand it to him.
How about us?
No, that's
Yeah.
fine.
While we figure this out, thanks for the introduction, Hannes. I think it's appropriate that you were talking about everybody complaining. It's a
Oh, you
nice
did.
introduction for me.
You got it?
What the hell? Oh, I see.
It's being shared. So
I had to choose. Okay.
it's just your big picture.
Welcome, everyone, to Thursday morning IETF Dublin. I took the liberty of combining the SDJOT and SDJOT VC topics into one slide deck as a bit of an optimization. I hope everyone will be okay with that. Here's a fine picture of the custom house just down the river, up the river, across the river. I'm not sure from us. Thanks for coming. Here we go. Little bit of a, there's no monitor. Okay, sorry. I'd like to give a little bit of an agenda, especially because Daniel Fett doesn't like agenda slides. When we talk about SDJOT, do a little bit of an overview and refresher, but don't worry, it's going to be much, much shorter than usual this time. Changes since we last gathered in a windowless conference room in a beautiful global city. And a little bit of looking ahead on SDJOT VC, overview, example, a little bit of that kind of stuff. Changes since last time, normal number. Look at a few open issues, little short, not short story about media types, and a discussion about what's next. So SDJOT, this is a real short one. What it is a relatively simple salted hash-based mechanism that's facilitating the selective disclosure of individual elements of a JSON encoded data structure used as the payload of a JSON web signature thing. The primary use case, but not the only one here, is for the selective disclosure of JSON web token JOT or JWT claims. What have we done since we last met in Vancouver? We had a working group last call, discussed at the meeting, bit of a false start there. Then we published 11 and 12. And had another working group last call, a real one this time. Got a lot of nice feedback in that, published a 13 addressing as much of it as seemed reasonable and accessible. And then the wise and benevolent chairs suggested that we have another short working group last call, so we began that and had a second working group last call that concluded about 2 weeks ago-ish, give or take. So what happened in there? In draft 11 of SDJOT, we added a paragraph that was attempting to better frame the risks and difficulties around issuer verifiable unlinkability. I said that wrong. Issuer verifier unlinkability with some discussion particularly about the risks of a government issuer or some huge service provider sort of implicitly compelling collusion between verifiers and the issuer itself. In 12, let's see, really just went through and cleaned up the examples. Hey, was that not on before?
No.
Okay,
Well, I put a ticket in and they fixed it.
wow,
I have power.
that was incredible. Thank you. That's super helpful.
Right.
So I fixed up some of the examples. That's really all that first bullet is. Editorial and reference fixes, just housekeeping stuff that was necessary and super helpful. We tried to, terminology is difficult. Always, it's a little bit loose through here and the SD.VC draft. So we tried to introduce more clearly this phrase of the processed SD.jot payload, meaning the end result JSON after receiving an SD.jot with disclosures, processing, putting the disclosure values back into the main JSON body, and give a name to that sort of document output of that processing artifact so that it could be talked about more reasonably and referred to directly in other documents. I moved the considerations around unlinkability up to the top of the privacy considerations section because I thought it was an important thing to highlight. I didn't change any of the content, but I just moved it. And we removed a brief discussion of publishing private keys, which was an attempt to reduce the value of leaked stolen data by sort of burning the private key and sort of burning everything down. It was something that I personally thought might cause more controversy than it actually helped. It's still possible, it's still avoidable, it doesn't matter, but we don't call attention to it anymore. So hopefully that will just streamline some readers' thought process going forward. In the excitement, I forgot that I was advancing my slides.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
I was looking to you to do it. So those were two things. So we decided we were going to have working group last call. Some feedback came in, some other things were noticed, published a draft, realized I hadn't gotten all the changes in it, published another draft, some more feedback came in. All this happened. And then we actually got to working group last call. These things happen. And another round of feedback came in from working group last call, and we did some updates on it. I wish I had done better note taking because I don't remember the specifics, but most of it was editorial content that we updated. Daniel rewrote the entire introduction to try to make it more accessible and more meaningful. And I have no idea what that means. Some note about the holder's verification. It was a helpful note someone asked for. I'm sure it's valuable. And then we had working group last call again. I thought this was funny, but maybe it's in reference to a movie that people are, only a few people are old enough to even know. Thank you. So we had working group last call again. We got some more feedback. Some more things came in. We have 42 or 41 unaddressed comments from Denis. We have one comment that's been reiterated now several times from Watson. We have declared unofficially World ABNF Day for those who celebrate. And we've done some thinking, a lot of thinking about types, types, content types, and media types is a bit of foreshadowing. In reference to the first two items, we are a consensus-driven working group. We all have limitations on our time and ability to pay attention to, react to, and progress work. And at this point in the process, I am going to ask that these comments be noted by the document shepherd in the shepherd write-up and noted as basically being in the rough with respect to rough consensus of the working group and the process proceed forward. Because I don't personally believe it's a productive use of anyone's time at this point to further discuss them or to dig into the individual details thereof. So, looking ahead, and maybe, just maybe looking forward to not talking about SD.jot in Bangkok. This is the rooftop of the venue hotel. I hope everyone shares that goal, that we can not have me sputtering and sputtering up here about at least this topic at the future meeting. So with that, on to SD-JOT VC. So SD-JOT itself is sort of the baseline extension to JOT that facilitates hash-based, salted hash-based selective disclosure around the JOT format or JWS format. SD-JOT VC is a layer above that, and it describes the data formats, different data formats, the inside pieces of the SD-JOT and how they could be used to express so-called verifiable credentials using plain JSON payloads, both with and without selective disclosure. Even though we're using selective disclosure mechanisms, it is perfectly reasonable to have a payload that doesn't do any selective disclosure, and it's still, everything else is still the same. It's just like processing a loop with no items. It's just a no op and you go on. So you can have selective disclosure or not, all inside the same format. Everything looks the same and you go on, you're happy. This uses SD-JOT and the well-established JWT content rules and extensibility model as the basis for representing these verifiable credential things. Describes a bit of issuer metadata, so a way to describe a little bit of metadata, data about the issuer of these things, including some verification keys. That's about all there is on issuer metadata. More recently, we've described a type metadata, which is really a larger concept of sort of, there's a type element or claim in the payload that says, hey, this is the type of thing, the type of verifiable credential it is, akin to maybe like an ID card or a driver's license, that level of typing. And then there's type metadata that can offer further details about what that particular type is, including JSON schema, typing extension functionality, as well as display metadata such that a wallet or phone type application that is in possession of one of these credentials could reasonably evaluate this metadata and try to give a display to the end user about what it looks like. Think a little bit of like rendering card in your phone itself. So there's mechanisms for doing that. I will remind everyone that this does not utilize the W3C's verifiable credential data model version 1.1.1 or version 2 at all. Excuse me.
We have a little problem.
Oh, refresh the page on your phone.
It's a good idea, except I can't do it because I'm using the app. And pull down and refresh it, and here we go.
Does it work again?
I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Too much talking on the slide.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so with that, following examples show what a hypothetical SD-JOT VC might look like representing the concept of a person identification data, which is a German, not a German, an EU concept, but of a hypothetical German citizen, thus the picture of Germany. But it's just an example of what this might look like, not actually specifying the constructs, but conceptually describing what it might look like. So don't get hung up on the actual nature of the data, just rough concepts. So you might have a set of input claims that are, as you see, one way to represent identity card-like data, personally identification data about this particular German citizen. I can't read either of them because my eyes are bad. There's first name, last name, birth date, place of origin, address, nationalities, etc. It's a JSON document with data in it about a person, basically JOT claims, basically. The actual SD-JOT looks like this. I don't expect you to read it, but do note the little squigglies in here. It's a JOT, signed JOT, not an encrypted one, signed JOT with extra data appended to the end that are these concepts of the disclosure based on how SDJOT works. I'm not going to go too far into that, except that the payload itself contains some clear text data and some disclosure hashes, or disclosure digests, I think we call them, which are these specially named claims that are arrays of hash values which point to the disclosure objects outside of the signed content. The whole trick of SDJOT being that this is all integrity protected under the signature. The hash of each one of these integrity protects the content of the disclosure outside the signature, but individual ones of those can be removed on presentation, thus hiding the actual details of the value from the verifier without breaking the integrity of the whole thing. The individual claims look like this. Sorry, that's impossible to read. These are not the individual claims, sorry. Each of the digest values in the payload itself references one of these disclosures, and these disclosures show, each one has a salt value, the actual value of the claim, and name and value of the claim. I'm not explaining this very well, sorry. And then a holder can take that and present it with a subset of that information. Basically, this is the selective disclosure piece. So you give the ability to the holder, the person probably using a phone, to choose which of these attributes about themselves they want to disclose in any particular context. In this example, they are only going to disclose their nationality and the fact that they're 18 years of age or older. That looks like this. It doesn't really matter. There's also a key binding to this that's included on it that binds this whole presentation to a key in possession of the holder. And then the disclosures actually just disclose these two things. The two pieces appended on the end give you nationalities and an age over 18 true value. All the rest of the data is, all the rest of the user data is hidden from the verifier. And the final process SDJOT payload looks like this. Basically, just those disclosed values get substituted back into the payload where they belong. Everything else is omitted, and you get this disclosure of a limited subset of the data to the verifier. Quick introduction. That wasn't quick. Probably wasn't that helpful, but maybe some people follow along, I hope. What's happened since IETF 20 in Vancouver? We published a draft 5. That's all we did, but we did do that. What was in that? We included display and claim type metadata. That's what I was talking about before. This is information derived from the type of credential itself about how individual pieces of it should be rendered and displayed to an end user in some context to help with usability and so forth. We added a big long example for type metadata, what that might look like. Clarified, added context, fixed up some examples. Actually, they were in need of a lot of improvement here, so we did kind of clean those up. And this is horrible, I'm sorry, it's a lot here, but this gives an idea of what the type metadata looks like. In summary, I won't go through all of it. You have the main type up there. The VCT is the same VCT, the verifiable credentials type that you'd see within the actual payload itself, so that matches up to the type in the metadata itself. We've got here like name and description, possibility that it extends another type, integrity mechanism for the document and the extents document itself, and then display information, including like locale, the name of the credential itself, rendering information, both simple like logo, background logo information, as well as a bunch of stuff you could do to render an SVG template, insert values, and all kinds of fun stuff like that. More of that. Did I go too far? More potential rendering information. So you could have this is just basically the same information repeated in a different language, tagged appropriately as such with language tags, different template. And then individual claim metadata. So you could say display metadata about each individual claim. It seems sort of obvious, but you can say things like the claim that appears at the path name in this document is name, or name in German that I can't pronounce, or address is address of the time of graduation, because this particular address was about a diploma type credential, I guess. I don't know. I'm lost. I'm sorry. There's too much JSON on here. One thing that is in there is this construct for identifying the location of the claim value within the credential. Sounds easy, but it's actually a pretty complicated, convoluted thing that a lot of people have different opinions about. We have opted for what is hopefully a very simple mechanism of defining the location of the path of the element as an array of locations within the document. So path, address, street address basically means the claim under the path, address, colon, another object, street address within the context itself. This construct is actually being used in DCQL or DOCL, nice shirt, Daniel, which is the digital credential query language that's being discussed and specified within the OpenID for VC working group, which is not what it's called. It's the DCP working group, but in the context of defining a credential query language for OpenID for verifiable presentations. This particular path construct is used within DOCL itself. DOCL is, am I pronouncing it right? The name of, in German, of a small wiener dog. So I decided to include a picture of my dog here because I like to put pictures in here. This dog, oh, and the point of saying this is we are quickly running into a situation where we're reusing this construct across a number of different specifications because it's really simple, it's really useful, but it does need to be specified. And unfortunately, we're repeating it in a lot of different places. So I'm calling out here the DRY principle from software engineering, which is don't repeat yourself. Unfortunately, we are. I'm only saying this, I don't have an answer because the timelines don't line up very well, but we have this thing that's kind of repetitive across different places. So and it was also an opportunity to include this picture of my dog and Daniel with his DOCL. I do need to note, this is not a DOCL, its legs are too long, and this picture was not actually dry. She was a puppy when I took this, and she pissed on the white background about 10 seconds after I took this photo. So not DOCL, not dry, but we do need to talk about and think about what we do with this query language, or we're going to end up with it specified in 2 or 3 or maybe more different places. Sorry, and not the query language, just the pathing construct from within the query language. It'd be great to pull that out and have it unified in a central location, but there's a lot of implications of doing that, and I don't know what to do about it. To log into my...
Yeah.
Oh, do we have? Yes, Aaron Parecki.
Hi, Aaron Parecki. Is there a reason not to use JSON path that already exists as a query language? Sorry, Daniel. There are good reasons.
Would you like to expand? You would do it.
No. Sorry, I did it again.
Hi,
This is the problem.
Daniel Fett to respond to that question. Yes, there are good reasons not to use JSON pointer and JSON path. JSON path is incredibly complex. It does allow to, I mean, you can say those things, right? $.address.street address would be the equivalent to that. But you can also add an expression that talks about properties in the objects that you're addressing, that you're filtering. It even goes so far that some implementations use a JavaScript eval construct inside of them because it does allow for several functions and predicates to be used, like max, min stuff, and smaller than, greater than stuff. It's incredibly complex to implement. And another thing is you do need to parse a string. So you need a proper parser for that string that knows what it's doing. Here you just need to look at an array, and you need essentially a nested loop to go through your object and find the correct element. So that's so the description for this, and it's a description of the whole algorithm that you need to evaluate this. It's about 1 page. JSON path is an incredibly complex specification. That was our reason to not use JSON path, main reason. And the security, there were security concerns as well. You can have JSON path implementations, but are they secure to, or do you trust them enough to put attacker-controlled strings in there? There are only few that make this promise, and not all of them. But I don't know whether you can actually trust them. JSON pointers is, so it does have this disadvantage that you still need to pass a string. So JSON pointer would be a little bit more appropriate here. But you still need to pass a string. You still need to use escaping when you want to assemble a JSON pointer, because it does have this special notation. And another aspect was that, if I remember correctly, JSON pointer is lacking a facility to say, I want to address all array elements. So because sometimes you have, like in a diploma, you might have various grades in there or something. When you want to request all of them, you cannot really express that. Or here in this context, when we want to say all the, I don't know, courses or whatever you have in a diploma should be presented in a certain way, you cannot do that in JSON pointer. So it's this one specific ability to say, of that array, all elements. That's missing in JSON pointer.
And this can reference one element, your method?
It can reference one element or all elements.
Yeah.
But the all elements is more important. The one element, I'm not sure if that's even important, but the all elements, like all degrees in that diploma, or all, I don't know, all addresses in your whatever document. So that's a feature that was missing.
So the side question's not at the mic, or Daryl Miller, and he's, it's okay, because you repeated pretty much what he asked anyway. Again. Oh my God.
It is a really good question, and at the surface level, and especially the names of the things, you would think that there's a lot of opportunity to reuse those constructs here. When you look at the actual details, the level of complexity and the opportunity for security and interoperability problems versus the value of building a very, very simple, straightforward construct that meets the needs here is, we found it extremely compelling to just use an array.
Hi, Justin Richer. So yeah, I had the same question as both Aaron and Daryl, and because this is sounding familiar, and when JSON Path came out, I was like, wow, this is like XPath, but maybe it'll suck less because it's less complicated, and it was at the time. And then it got more complicated because people took this nice, clean, simple thing and realized, hey, there's other stuff we can add to it. There's other features we can do with this, and then it grew. And then it grew, and then it grew. And every text editor eventually contains an operating system, right? As the old Unix adage goes. This is, I hear some chuckles from some obvious Emacs users behind me. So, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were a real Unix person. I'll ignore you now. Anyway, so my point being that, yeah, I agree. This is clean. It's clever. And if this is very, very, very specifically scoped to just path, then it doesn't actually need to be DACL. And I get why reuse, but reuse begs the question of why not reuse all of it? And why not reuse all of it begs the question of, aren't we pulling in a big complicated query language that's going to continue to grow and do its thing? Like, I know the implementers are not stupid and they know the history of this, and this is a deliberate choice, but it still seems strange to me that this is, it's trying to simplify in this way.
Yeah, Daniel Fett to respond to that. Maybe to give a little bit more context here, I think that might be missing. In OpenID for BP, we had this query language that's called Presentation Exchange, which does not only have JSON schema, JSON path, but also JSON schema, by the way. And it's just really, really complex. It's like it's a Swiss Army knife for querying credentials, but it's really hard to implement. So over a process of, I don't know, 9 months or something, we came up with DACL to be included in OpenID for VP. And we got feedback on that, especially last week at IW, but also through other channels. And multiple implementers told us that the biggest advantage is that we don't have JSON path in it, because they found it to be incredibly complicated also to like evaluate, to look at a string and say, okay, what does this point to? What does this mean? So pulling the whole of DACL in here doesn't make sense because it's a credential query language. It talks about which combinations of credentials to present, which claims to present. It doesn't make much sense to pull all of that in here. But it's just this path construct that we found to be repeating across various specifications.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. I probably wasn't totally clear on that. DACL uses this construct, this narrow construct in here. This uses this little construct. And it would be really nice if that particular piece could be pulled out and referenced from elsewhere, not the whole DACL piece, not all of this, but just that. It's kind of like extract this one function and put it over here. It's just there's process and various impediments to doing that. So, but it's only a small piece.
Hi, Aaron Parecki. Thanks for the clarifications. It's a very compelling argument. I would suggest that all of that background and reasoning get added to the draft in a section, maybe a design considerations section or something. I feel like without doing that, you're going to just end up with people asking these questions again. And if DACL gets created as a new draft, then absolutely that draft should say the query language. Yeah, then it should say like, why is this different from existing query languages? But I also think that the SDJOT, this one should say why it's using this over other query languages that exist. Otherwise, you're just going to get the same questions again later, and we'll have to dig through the recordings of the session on YouTube to find it, which is not going to be terribly scalable.
That's a really good point. Acknowledged.
Yeah.
Daryl Miller. Completely understand your reason for not wanting to use JSON path, but I do think you should look again at JSON pointer in the RFC 6901. Pointing to an array is one of the first examples in there. I've done an implementation of JSON pointer. It's about 70 lines of code in my implementation. So I look at the example here and I look at degrees, comma, null, and I can't infer from that what that means. So you're asking people to go learn something new to do something that there is a fair amount of precedent using JSON pointer out there already today.
That's definitely good. So what's the plan on this one? So did you originally plan to write up a separate draft with this, or did you want to include text on this query language? Or like this came to me, and I haven't been following the OpenID work. That came a little bit out of nowhere, to be honest. And maybe that's also true for some members in the group.
Yeah. May I?
Go ahead.
Okay. Daniel Fett again. So to the JSON pointer, I think the problem is you cannot say all elements off. You can say element number 5 off. But I think what's missing is to address all elements. Otherwise, okay, we need to take another look. And to the other question, so this kind of evolved. This was created out of a certain need, right? That's why probably you're hearing of this for the first time, because we had the need in DACL, we had the need in OpenID for VCI, where there's a place where we also want to do exactly that. And we had the same need in the SD.VC type metadata as well. So it was just 3 places where we had the same problem. And the idea here was that it seems to be a good idea to pull that out somewhere, but I don't think we have any plans beyond that. So
Yeah,
we have that is just an idea. We could do it. We could do it here. We could do it elsewhere. We could do it now. We could do it later. So yeah.
the idea here was simply to draw attention to the possibility for that need to pull it out. That was all at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
We got a lot more.
Okay. That's definitely something we need to talk about. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for making us aware.
So the issue tracker, I only put this here to note there's a lot of issues. Do we have a time running? There are a lot of issues. We have 30 minutes left? 20. There's a lot of stuff in here that needs triage, it needs work. It's kind of a mess. I take some responsibility for that, but we need to kind of buckle down on this. I'll talk about a couple of these specifically. One I think is near term really important is currently the type metadata uses the well-known path construct to go from a type value of an HTTPS URL to finding the type metadata JSON document. It has been pointed out that this is not probably an appropriate use of the well-known construct. And I say this admitting that this document and this working group in general has probably done some inappropriate things with well-known. This is like 2 steps more inappropriate, and I think clearly needs to be changed. And I say that here kind of with a nod to, it'll be simple, we'll do something else, but it actually is a little hard, I think, to define a construct. Otherwise, do you want that type to point directly to the JSON document? Makes sense. You just go take that HTTPS URL, resolve the document, all is well. But you might also want that value to resolve to an actual human readable description or documentation or something. So maybe that doesn't make sense, and that description would in turn point you to the some kind of convention is probably wise here, but I'm not actually sure what the best way to do it is. And meanwhile, we have like too many other ways to go from a type to a type metadata document. So I think we need to clarify this, tighten this up, choose fewer, and provide some kind of convention that's not relying on the well-known metadata, well-known document to find the type metadata itself. The real reason why it's not appropriate is well-known is something about the host, while type metadata is something about this kind of document or credential type. And they're totally different, really, they're totally different. And particularly like a host might very well, independent of any kind of tenanting issues you sometimes think about as problems with well-known, a particular host, like a standards organization, might host multiple type metadata documents because they're sort of the global main namespace for defining those particular types. It doesn't map up well. We need to fix it. Actual thoughts about clean ways to fix it would be fantastic. Unstable connection to the server, trying to recover. There we are. My eyes aren't good enough. In the last meeting, we talked about type metadata. John said something about there being privacy implications. He's probably not wrong, but that ended up as an issue in the tracker that he's also probably not right, if that's fair to say, like to the extent that it needs to be addressed. But now we have something floating out there. Are there privacy implications? Yes. Are they real? Yeah, I don't know. Compared to the other ones, I don't know. Is there anything we can reasonably do or say about it? Probably not. Or if they are, some help would be really appreciated in getting to something forward to that. Otherwise, we need to like get through some of this stuff, I guess is my implication there. And speaking of getting through things, at around the last IETF, Leif mentioned that he was interested in seeing these references to DIDs and DID resolutions completely removed from the document. Gave some very good reasoning for that, being that they're not at all like meaningful interoperable. There are a lot of ways that it is underspecified in the document. And the document itself already allows for extensibility mechanisms. So removing this stuff that doesn't work anyway doesn't break any functionality for anybody, but it clarifies, significantly reduces the cognitive overhead of the document, simplifies the document itself, and might allow us to make some progress working on what I would consider more pressing issues in progressing the document forward. And there are, in fact, external timelines that are interested in seeing this work finished sooner rather than later, even on a non-IETF scale, which is already a challenge. So I am agreeing with Leif here and am basically right now proposing that this stuff be removed. And if there are real objections to that, other than DIDs are great, I guess I'd like to hear them. But right now, we need to make progress. We need to move forward. This stuff has got to go. And so far, the only commentary on the list has been how great DIDs are and that we need them. And oh my God, if you remove them, then what's going to break? Ignoring the fact that nothing breaks because it's completely extensible and you can do whatever you need to do if you really need to do that. Well, I feel like here we're trying to define a standard that can be implemented, deployed, and used. We need to tighten things up and move forward. All right, I'm really sorry about this. Both what's about to come, both my misuse of a tale of two reference, but I want to talk about types, content types, type types, and media types. This is an actual fire that I came across on my way home to the hotel the other night here in Dublin. Oh yeah, that I put out as the hero that I am, with my shoe stamping on it. And I now have plastic burned onto the side of my shoe. So that's the cost of heroism. Dean offered a better way. Dean was in fact correct. Dean's better way, if you want to put the pieces together, had a lot of similarity to the story I told about my dog and the white background previously. That's all I'm going to say about that.
This is a power cable, by the way.
Thanks for reminding me, Dean. All right, here we go. Buckle up, or not, or go to sleep. I don't know. So in JWS, JWE, and JWT, there's a lot of text you can't read here. There are headers defined for these constructs. There are two different headers. One is the type header, which says the type of what this thing is. It's required to be a media type, and it has some special rules about being able to drop sort of the, I forget what the names are. What's the first part of the media type there? Yeah, the application slash, but that's the yeah, that part. Oh, thanks. I'm glad you can read that because I can't. That is a construct now inside of the thing that you're already processing to tell you what the type of thing is so you can process it. I've always thought it's a little weird, but it's there. It's a type inside the thing that says what the thing is. There's also a content type. It has the same special rules about dropping the prefix. It's a media type, but it describes what's inside the payload of the JWS or JWE. JWT, as we all know, or we don't, I don't know, is either a JWS, a JWT, or both, with some JSON claims in the middle. So it reuses all these constructs, but provides its own guidance around it. JWT has some interesting rules about type itself. It recommends to type a JWT as JWT, which some of you that may know me, I find this to be a less than useful construct and am horribly annoyed by the fact that all over the internet now we have JWTs that say they're JWTs in type, including an example earlier this week in Jose. We have a example JWT inside the JWT that you know is already a JWT. It says it's a JWT. It frustrates me. It's a sidebar. I don't know. Don't worry about it. But type hasn't been super valuable in that construct. Oh, and also type does not allow you to distinguish. The ones that are defined don't allow you to distinguish between the so-called compact serialization and the JSON serialization. It does not allow you to distinguish. Yes, it does. I'm sorry. It does allow you to do that. It doesn't give you any hints as to whether it's a encrypted object or a signed object, which some folks had suggested it was useful for, and that we needed to have it there to do that. It never even gave that in the first place. So let's.
You would have to parse further.
You have to parse anyway.
Well, then that's not a problem.
Yes.
Okay.
So that leads to why it's not that useful.
No, I mean, would you want it to say that it's either a signed object or encrypted object already at the top instead of passing into it?
It was suggested somewhere in between the two last call reviews that that's what it was really useful for, and that should be maintained or communicated further. And it doesn't do that. It's never done that. So preserving that functionality isn't a useful goal because it doesn't exist. And in your example, you have to parse the whole thing already. You know whether it's signed or encrypted based on the structure of that thing that you already had to parse to pull out the header. Yeah, the number of dots. And then once you're in it, you're already processing it. Now, you could do it the other way. If the construct had been defined, you could pull off the front header, you could evaluate it, then you could process the rest of the payload. But the constructs to do that were never defined. So nobody, I shouldn't say nobody because there's always somebody. I am not aware of anybody that does that processing that way because there's no facilities in the standards to do processing that way, so it doesn't work out that way. It's a long way of saying what people sometimes imagine this stuff might be used for isn't actually what happens in practice. Content type being one of those things that's evolved over time somewhat interestingly. Later on, actually shortly after all this stuff was released to the world, JOT, JWS became wildly popular by IETF standards, and not relative to like the marquee ones like TLS and HTTP, but the other stuff we do isn't as great. And JOT's been used far and wide for all kinds of things we never anticipated it would be used for. It's really successful in that. It's really great in that respect. But with that has come some criticism. Some of it is very legitimate. Some of it is hyperbole, but it's there. One of the things that was done in response to that criticism.
But
you want to keep
I don't
it on
want
this
to
slide?
keep it there because it's also a product of the working group. Like we've discussed some of that criticism, and you need to take it with a grain of salt because some of the people who make that comments, they also then propose in the next step their own mechanism, and this is sort of the justification of why they create their own thing and their own company and so on and so on. So
you mean like people coming up with a new query mechanism because they have criticisms of JSON path? Is it like that, Hannes, or is this different?
It's kind of.
It is in fact different.
Okay,
Oh,
good.
I
I'll
think
sit
it's-
down now.
One key difference is we are not offering a incorporated consultancy around that new query language. But there's a lot of motivation behind it. Some of these people are just venting. Some of them are very legitimate criticisms of the design that have led to problematic implementations that have in turn led to very serious security vulnerabilities that were arguably avoidable in the first place. Some of them are people making statements that are not fully informed, even though they know a lot about other layers. They don't quite understand how it's happened here. Anyway, I had this slide for another presentation and I wanted to copy it here because I like it. There was, and as a setup for the next slide, which is in response to this, in this working group, we did develop a BCP that tried to address a lot of the common security pitfalls of using this stuff. It's a long document, as they are, but one particular area that this document tried to address was the possibility of token type confusion or intentional swapping of token types across contexts to allow access to things you weren't supposed to be accessing. And the recommendation for avoiding that is explicitly typing the token. So you give it a type such that the context can understand what the intended type was and reject tokens that were not for that. And that has been enshrined in BCP. I can't remember, you can probably read it in the URL, as a mechanism to explicitly type JWTs, and to do so using the type header that inside the thing says what the thing is, and to use a structured media type suffix of plus JWT or JOT when doing so. Sorry. And so now we have this explicit typing construct. The word explicit made me think of the old days of trying to buy CDs without my parents' permission at the CD store. I've probably already dated myself again, if I didn't already. And there's a bunch of JWT explicit types that are registered media types. And what's happened is explicit typing has largely become a mechanism to confirm in a particular context what you expect is what you're getting. Not as media types are often used, which is like content type of an HTTP response that says, hey, this is what you have, now you know how to process it. This is much more of, you already know what you have, you know what you expect. Why don't you make sure it is in fact that, so that you don't get something else and you can reject it. There's a bunch of these defined. You'll see they're all end in plus JWT here, and a number of them are intentionally short, like AT plus JWT is for JWT defined access tokens for OAuth. DPOP plus JWT is for DPOP. Many of these media types are explicitly, intentionally short because everything in JOT is recommended to be short, and they don't have any actual media type. There is no AT media type. There is no DPOP media type. These exist on their own alone, only in the context of combination with that JOT structured suffix. The idea of SD-JOT was conceived at the OAuth security workshop in Norway back in 22. This is really just a chance to throw up a picture on the slide deck in front of you. And then mention of OSW was a chance to provide you with some advertising. Please consider OAuth Security Workshop 2025, which will be in Iceland.
We can have an interim meeting there.
In all seriousness, and I was late for the Monday meeting, I apologize, I've had trouble with time. I think you did mention this, so I felt bad about bringing it up until I saw the chairs brought it up. It's a really nice forum for collaboration, and a non-trivial number of items that have ended up in the context of this working group were first talked about or advanced or conceived at one of these various things. It's a wonderful place for collaboration. There's good people there. It's a nice event. Okay, skip ad. SD-JOT itself debuted in Philadelphia in July of 22. It was adopted shortly thereafter. That's Rocky, while we're dating ourselves. Notably, the first adopted document had Daniel Fett and Christina as authors of it, not myself. Shortly after IETF 115, where I spent a lot of time in the large meeting space yelling at Daniel about things I didn't like, and giving him ideas that I liked better, he kindly invited me to help edit the document, and I found myself as a co-editor on it circa November, December of 22. The dates are important, sort of. Not too much longer, or in June of 23, so a few months after that, we added basically the same explicit typing recommendations from the JOT BCP to the SD JOT document, saying, hey, you should explicitly type this stuff, it's a good idea. I had some somewhat related thoughts when asked to add a structured media type suffix for the JSON serialization of SD JOT. This was a hard moment for me because I never liked the typing construct in the first place. I never liked the explicit typing construct in the first place. I didn't like the JSON serialization of JWS, and I didn't like the JSON serialization of in SD JOT. So I ranted here a little bit, and I won't read it. You can find it somewhere, I don't know, about how weird of a construct it is to have something inside itself that you're already processing in order to tell you how to process the thing that you're already processing. But I also noted that it is now sort of established way of doing things, more so for that explicit typing, confirm what you expect in the context, than for this sort of know how to process the thing that you're already processing. So here we are, and we added that construct in very similar wording to SD JOT itself. Along comes, go back a few years when the slide I was expecting, circa 2017, the verifiable credentials, that word may be familiar, working group was chartered within the W3C. In 17, I'd like to point out that nobody actually owns the term verifiable credentials, but the VC, excuse me, the W3C was using it long before it was even the glint in the eye of this here working group. So there's no ownership, but there's certainly some precedence. At the same time, some people have felt that the work out of that working group is somewhat less than accessible to the average or normal person. It's a little bit harder, maybe, than some people think it should be, not accessible. In the context of that working group, there was a big discussion about whether or not at context was required. This probably doesn't mean anything to anybody except whether or not, unless you're involved in it, it was really about whether or not JSON LD would be a hard requirement for verifiable credentials, and whether that stuff there could potentially be simplified in a way that would be more accessible to regular type people. It was at the time, I think, agreed that it would not be a hard requirement. You could use regular old plain JSON inside of those verifiable credentials. Despite that compromise, that changed a few months later, and JSON LD is a hard requirement. In that, I see we have someone coming to the mic, who, by the way, has some specific familiarity with that working group.
I would like to, the Brent Zundell, chair of the VC working group at W3C, for my sins. I do want to clarify the Miami resolution and the fallout therefrom, if that's okay. It was decided very firmly in Miami. It was a beautiful meeting. It was a long meeting. That transformations to the verifiable credentials data model, as we were describing it, could then call themselves verifiable credentials if there was a demonstrated transformation. The description of going back on that isn't quite accurate. What the group then could not do was agree on how to do it within the group. The decision to allow other groups to make those transformations was never rescinded. The text is still in the document. And if other folks want to say, here's our transformation, they're more than welcome to do that, for however they define the word transformation.
Thanks for that clarification. My apologies if I misrepresented specifics out of that. I think the net result, though, was the folks that were interested in simplicity were not happy enough with the results to continue pushing for the work there. And specifically, Many of the people that are interested in simplified work are wholly uninterested in abstract transformation algorithms, because those are, in fact, at least in my experience, not simple. And so, one way or the other, some people decided that it would be a good idea to attempt to produce the same kinds of work in a much more simplified, accessible way here within the IETF. Please.
So is this like reinventing JSON path?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's for the please continue. It's fair. And so this document, SD.VC, debuted at IETF 117 in San Francisco. Obviously, you know, this is just an opportunity for me to show another picture from San Francisco, beautiful city. This occurred in July 2023. Shortly after it was adopted, and the first citing of the media type VC plus SD.JOT appeared in this document around that same time frame. I provided a retroactive rationale for why this was, and that was that the anticipated request for this media type was modeled roughly after existing media types like application AT plus JOT and dplot plus JOT, where a relatively short value is useful to the part of the left of the suffix, and the part of the left of the suffix, the base subtype name, as it's been now understood to be called, I didn't know the name at the time, doesn't have any obvious utility on its own and isn't itself a registered media type. At the time that text was written, there may have been contention over who was allowed to or entitled to use the term VC or verifiable credentials, but there was no actual or prospective conflict in the registry itself for this application VC plus SD.JOT media type. At that point in time, the VC Jose Coze document, which is a product of the Verifiable Credentials Working Group, had anticipated a request to register this application slash VC plus LD plus JSON plus SD.JOT thing. That I said, not having been there for the decision, but I believe it to be true as the reason why SD.JOT VC ended up as the requested media type in SD.JOT VC, and I realized just then it's VC plus SD.JOT ended up in SD.JOT VC. If that's confusing, welcome to my world. I was about to ask for the next slide. Here's another opportunity for a picture. I missed the Prague meeting, so I got to put a picture of Prague from a long, long time ago, about 14 years ago, in here. But more importantly, I will note that at the time that happened, I think I did already, I was not there. So this is not my fault. Thank you. Though I did get added to the document later, and now I find myself here. Prague's a beautiful city, by the way. Anyone in the audience from Prague? Philippe. Oh boy, how much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? I always have that on my mind when I write something like this. I have no idea if people see it when they read it or not, but now they will. The VCDM 2.0, the Verifiable Credentials Data Model, around and up until June of 2024, anticipated a request to register the media types VC plus LD plus JSON and VP plus LD plus JSON for LD-based verifiable credentials and verifiable presentations, respectively. This VC Jose Coze document, it's a long name, but basically it's another document that says how to take this base media type and secure it either with JWT or JWS, depending on how you look at it, SD.JOT or Coze, and each one of those, this document anticipated registering all these different media types. You can see the pattern here. They're the same subtype plus the suffix, but many suffixes. And then it was also going to register all of these different structured suffixes. At the same time all this was happening, and many years before or around the same time, there was a push to allow for media types to be registered with multiple suffixes in the, or maybe causing the formation of the Media Man working group. I don't actually know, I wasn't there for all that history, but it was a long running discussion there that up until about June of 24, there was a document, this media types with multiple suffixes, basically attempting to explain how multiple suffixes would even work and be processed, and explaining why they were okay, how they would work, and why they could be registered in the media type registry. I keep wanting to ask for another. I'm almost done, I promise. Sort of. Then it was decided that there can only be one, and we're talking about a little different things. So in this context, there can only be one plus in a media type, meaning there can only be one suffix. Suffix, I think, actually implies that by its name, but English is only my first language, so I struggle with English. Around that same time, the multiple media type suffixes document switched from being multiple media types to an explanation of why only one was allowed, and the VCDM document very quickly also switched from the multiple suffixes registrations to registering VC and VP directly, and then was actually registered in the registry. Even though the document, I think that happened about here in June of 2024, and then there were lots of additional releases. It was basically registered against the moral equivalent of a working group draft. I see Brent has some thoughts. I'll pause. It doesn't really matter, Brent. I'm gonna give it in the end, but please clarify.
Just to Brent Zundell, for those unfamiliar with W3C process, a candidate recommendation draft is something that's published every time a minor or major change is made to a document while it's in the candidate recommendation phase. The candidate recommendation phase is similar in many ways to working group last call. And it's the candidate recommendation snapshots that actually matter. Just FYI.
I'm sorry, but would you then have any concern that the registrations were made against not a candidate recommendation snapshot?
Candidate recommendation snapshot precedes a candidate recommendation draft.
And then changes.
And then the draft changes. And then if you make any normative changes, you have to do another snapshot.
Okay. Brent and I see some process things from different perspectives. And we both know that. Anyway, this happened. It was registered. Apparently registries are like, once it's there, it's pretty serious. So it's there. And the result is at least the implication that now this underlying media type VC exists in the registry. Oh, so many pieces of this. Despite that, the VC Jose document was going to register these similar to the ones you saw before, but with more dashes and less pluses. Eventually that did change. And it now anticipates registration of these ones that you see here. The one highlighted itself happens to be in direct conflict with the media type that the SD.VC document in this working group also anticipates that it wants to register. Neither one can do anything about it right now because the structured suffix is not yet registered, because that's in the SD.base document itself. But once that is registered, the expectation is the VC Jose document will request registration of this particular media type. And then there will be an existing registry entry that conflicts with what the document in this working group wants to register. And that's kind of bad. There's a bunch of other arguments and politics around that. But one suggested problem with it is confusion around the base media type of VC being registered, meaning the verifiable credentials data model, when this document ultimately intends to register something with that base media type, a different suffix, but that means something else. The actual structure of the JSON is different. And so there is arguably some confusion of that. When and how different parts came to be in the registry is obviously a point of discussion, but that's how we got there. I see a chair and an AD looking at me sideways. I'm going. I know what it means. So where does that leave us? And if you think this has been a long meeting, I apologize, but I've spent a lot more time thinking and talking about this. It's a long, convoluted thing. What options do we have? Basically, there's going to be this conflict. It seems unavoidable. Well, it's not unavoidable. Here are ways we could avoid it. The VC Jose Jose could actually use content type itself and VC and VP media types that they already have, and not introduce any new media types, and allow for explicit typing, allow for typing of their unique data model. It's all technically viable. It's not in direct violation of any recommendations anywhere in here. If maybe it's a little different than many people interpret it. This is a completely reasonable solution, but it seems increasingly unlikely and vanishingly would be a better word. So it doesn't seem like it happened, but it's my baby that I've tried to push as an actual compromise. So I wanted to say it here because in the spirit of compromises, I've tried. Other options are, we could stay the course here with SD.VC, including appeals. I now understand that the appeal window on the base media type has closed. So there's nothing that can be done about that. And ultimately that leads to the argument in many ways that there will be some confusion, which really hurts the position of anything, arguments, objections, and other pushback we might have here. Also, this is exhausting. I'm exhausted by it, and it's turning out to be largely ineffectual. At least it's not fun. And yeah, I mentioned the appeals window is closed. That part about not being fun was a joke. You can laugh at me or with me. Either's fine. Or stand in silence. That's awkward. We could change the media type in SD.VC. There are a non-trivial downstream number of specifications and implementations that would be broken by such a change. That's it. It's a reality. Naming is hard, by the way, so if we decided to do that, there'll be a lot of bike shedding, so be it. The Clubhouse leader right now, as some side discussions have led, is DC plus SD.VC. I'm going to skip that because it's whatever. Anyway, if we did this, our AD and probably chairs and a lot of other people would probably be really happy to be rid of this mess. Another option is we could hedge, pivot, defer. We could add something like a plus JSON-SD media type structured in SD.jot, basically saying with the intended usage of a content type to use these constructs here, to use content type instead of type as a typing mechanism, and further adjust the guidance in SD.jot to sort of allow for this versus using type. Sometimes I think about this as a good idea, but in my wiser moments, it's probably too much of a change and too much of a departure to really take seriously. As much as I dislike the existing construct, it's better to be consistent with it than to take a whole scale change from it. And since I may, oh, sorry, we're not there. Next step, nobody knows. Daniel, that was a joke for you. But registration is open for IETF 122 in Bangkok. That is where I was going to leave this presentation until recently, and I added 2 more slides. And now I have basically the Dublin proposal. So hopefully to call this the Dublin Accord, I am at this point, because it sounds cool, going to recommend that we change the media type in SD.VC to DC plus SD.jot. D is for digital. I had AI generate this lovely D is for digital picture riffing off of C is for cookies as a Sesame Street thing. I did have to talk it into letting me violate its content and IP like policy because it didn't want to riff on Sesame Street, but a little coercing it gave it to me. It's fun. I'm proposing that we don't change any other names right now. There is a line of thinking that says, well, if you change the media type to digital credentials, shouldn't you change the name of the draft? And then the things that use it, shouldn't you change them too? In an attempt to sort of make a surgical change that only addresses the near-term problem of registry conflict, I'm suggesting we only change the media type right now and move forward with that. Meanwhile, I alluded earlier to, there are timelines that are interested in seeing this work done very quickly. So in context with this, I would like to simplify the scope, tighten the scope, simplify the whole thing, and significantly accelerate the RFC timeline for this document while making this small change. Stop fighting about all these things and hopefully get this thing out soon being relative in the IETF timeline. And I'm sure I'm way over schedule. Thank you all for listening.
Any
Yeah.
feedback? So obviously there's a lot of history, probably more than you ever wanted to know about this stuff.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
More than I wanted.
Yeah. But this is sort of like the unpleasant part of standardization work in some sense. So what do the people in this room think? Is that a good way forward, or like you thought about this hard and long, and so Justin?
Justin Richer, totally agree with Brian's proposal here. Change the name. Somebody else got there first. It sucks. Whatever. Move on. And we can drop did support in, not out of spite, totally. But I also agree to drop did support while I'm up here.
Out of interest in accelerating the timeline.
Yes, exactly. They're both the same reason.
Thanks for your support.
Tim Capelli, not that it has to be consistent with the ecosystem, but DC is consistent with all the other moving parts here. So I think that name sounds great.
That's definitely going to be the easiest way as far as I can see, and I will help you.
Your name?
Murray.
But nobody else does.
Huh?
The remote people don't.
Oh, well, I queued up. It
Oops.
should
Okay.
be showing them.
Perfect.
I am not
Okay.
Justin.
Hey,
however.
Mark.
I am not Justin. However.
Yeah. This is Justin.
Mike Jones, yeah, do that. Drop the did support. And I will say that I think as a security construct, the explicit typing has worked out well, because then the type is part of the secured content. It can't be forged. And if you receive something that's, say, a logout token in a context where it was supposed to be an ID token or what have you, you can tell and say, no, not here, thank you.
100% agree. To clarify some of my prior criticisms, explicit typing, I think, is a wonderful construct. I am not wholly convinced that the way we went about it was the best in retrospect, but it's done. So it's probably better to continue the way we've done it with more things that we've done it.
And finally, I'll say that the type : jot is a historical context or construct that I can explain in a bar to you sometime.
Ooh, I look forward to
And
it.
not that I believe it's what anybody should be doing now. Thank you.
Acknowledged. Thank you.
If we have a BIS draft, yeah, we'll delete it.
So with my 80 hat on, sort of, maybe, I don't know. Will you ask for provisional registry to media types when you do this?
Certainly could. I don't.
I think they won't forget. But it wouldn't hurt, right?
It wouldn't hurt. I don't anticipate any problems with this one, but given
No, I don't expect the DEs are going to forget this for a while.
given everything, yeah. I will, yes, I will make the change. I will ask for provisional registration, and then it'll be provisionally official.
Whatever that means, right?
Hi, Daniel Fett. On the 3 points, DC plus SD drought is the second best choice after VC plus SD drought. It would be great if we would not change it now, but yeah, I don't think it's a good place to spend more energy on. So yeah. Also, we have DACL, which already has DCQL, right? So yeah. Don't
Well,
change other names. Yeah.
That I think that discussion is still sort of like up in the air, but whether you use DACL for this specific purpose?
No. I'm just saying there's this other name in the space. Like,
Okay.
Where the
Right.
names are going in the
yeah,
space.
I'm not.
This is
That was not related to any of the previous.
Okay.
discussion. Just saying, name in same space where we already didn't use VC but DC, but just because it makes a nice name, Wackel would be strange. So don't change other names, not now anyway. Yeah, let's not discuss that now. Let's
not now
discuss that
anyway.
later. Also broader scope than just the IETF drafts. Tighten the scope. I'm totally for dropping the did thing. One other candidate would be this display metadata. Might be okay. We don't have many implementations on that. I would not support dropping the type metadata altogether, because that's a, so first of all, that's a great extension point. And second, if we drop that now, that would create ecosystems where this VCT thing is used in a completely different way. And then you cannot add that on later. So that's a part I would like to keep, type metadata. If we say that the display thing is not tested enough, fine for me.
Noted. This tighten the scope is doing a lot of work here. It could be interpreted different ways. But your position is well understood and largely agreed with.
Daryl Miller, as the MediaTab reviewer who approved application/VC/VP, sorry.
I don't believe
There's
any
work going
apologies necessary.
on RFC 6838 to introduce
Yeah.
wording that will hopefully maybe stop these kind of things from happening again in the future.
Oh, one more,
Two more.
two more.
Hi, Pamela Dingle. Maybe this is a question for both of you then. Will you also go for the one ring to bind them all and register application DC? Is that a
Nope.
requirement for this?
Nope.
Should it
What-
be a requirement?
It's not currently. Should it be?
I mean, or are we going to get back into this if somebody else registers that? Is
That's a
the-
fair question.
The way we're looking to put wording in 6838 is if you did not register application/DC and somebody else attempted to register application/DC, you would be notified before that registration goes through so that there could be a conversation that happens. So it's possibly not essential that
Okay.
if you don't have a need for it, don't add it in.
It's a good question though, Pam, and maybe something we should chat a little bit about more, but it's technocratic stuff that we can, yeah.
Hi, Yogesh from ARM. I just had a simple question. VC had a meaning, like it's a verified credential, now changing to DC. Are you losing some kind of context because of that? And how do you see that?
How are you going to handle that, Brad?
I'm gonna just change the letter. I mean, seriously, yes and no. There's a lot embedded in that meaning, and there's also not a lot really. It's gonna say what it says in the spec. D is your digital credential. It's gonna be kind of the same thing as a verifiable credential. The name verifiable credential, honestly, is sort of problematic to begin with. So this is a proposal at a narrow solution to an immediate problem without trying to get into meaning and semantics at a broader level. I'm not answering your question at all, but maybe it does. I'm gonna just change I'm gonna change as little as possible to make the conflict go away.
Thank you.
Yeah, just want to emphasize here again that there's like
Oh.
many SD-JOT implementations out there, probably more than 100 deployments in Europe
I
that
can't hear
currently
you.
use,
Hear you, Paul.
I don't know why.
We don't hear him in the room. Yeah, so but the audio doesn't work. Okay, Darren.
Somebody want to transcribe the transcript into.
Darren, we need to move on anyway. Darren, do you want to add something real quick, Justin, you as well?
Real quick, AT access token, if you're outside of this community, it's a very generic vanilla word. So digital credentials being a very generic thing is following precedent.
Thank you.
Justin Richard, yeah, naming things is hard. This is not going to be perfect. We ran into a lot of problems with the NIST 863 documents. Anytime we wanted to talk about a credential that could be verified, we could no longer use the term a verifiable credential, because anytime we did, anybody within the W3C community descended on us and said, why didn't you link to our specs since you're talking about it? Because we weren't. So yeah, anything you pick is going to be wrong in some way. Embrace that. A digital credential is a terrible name, but so is verifiable credential, because they don't actually tell you anything, but it's a name. It's meant to be a pointer within a context that makes sense. So this is fine.
One terrible name
Okay,
for another.
those are.
Okay. Thank you all for listening to me. In a lot of ways, this was sort of just an exercise in my getting over things. So I think we've come to the right conclusion, and I appreciate the patience in listening to me rant. Also for Brent to be here and sit in the back row.
Brian, yeah, that was a big therapy session. Next time we put the sofa up here. Like you blew over the time window considerably, which means that we are actually back to the pre-agenda bashing agenda, which means that we are going to switch over to the one-time tokens. Apologies for that, sorry. But we had to go through this and sort of like find a way forward, because otherwise this keeps consuming a lot of everyone's time, and it's not productive at all. Of course we can have an interim on that. Yeah. So we'll note that, and yeah. Okay. So
Oh, wait.
what did you do?
I took control from Brian,
But
and
you,
then I closed the deck.
okay.
So we're good. This is why you shouldn't let me sit up here.
That's fine. Okay. So there are two presentations. I think we have 30 minutes. So you have 15 minutes for this presentation and 15 minutes for the other one, and then we will be, yeah, everything will be great.
Who was complaining about OAUTH taking 6 hours? And now you're short.
Oh, you want to take control?
You can give him control.
Yep. Ask slide. Yep. Okay. Cool. This was one. Then go for this one. No.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dmitry, and we also have Neil. Do we have a Neil? Neil Madden?
He's online.
Okay, he'll be online. So a completely different topic. Yeah. No worries. I also need to apologize. So we are not presenting any drafts today. So honestly, I started looking into a draft and putting it together, and it turned out to be very huge, and probably it will result in more than one draft one day. So today it's more about like presenting our crazy and naive ideas and getting your feedback and answering the question: is this something that could be done with OAuth in a secure, compatible, and privacy-preserving manner? So one-time objects in OAuth. We already have authorization codes, of course. We have now depot proofs. I believe we have another class of objects that are similar to access tokens. I will explain the each part soon. Let's call them confirmation tokens and define a confirmation token as a credential that an already authenticated user needs to obtain in order to perform a particular operation that requires additional authentication to that the user already has. Yeah, I understand this is similar to step up, but it's very different from that. I'll have a slide on that. Well, what kind of operations? Well, first of all, payments. It's like the case, probably. But it's not limited to payments. It could be, for example, disclosing sensitive information like card details and security codes. It could be generating a bank statement or edit a trusted pay that you can perform a payment to without additional authentication. Or setting a pay pin, like similar concept. Not surprisingly, every example here comes from the finance world, but I'm pretty sure we can find equivalents in other domains as well. So just I forgot to say that Neil and I will be presenting two different approaches to roughly the same problem with different levels of naivety and craziness. So why I believe confirmation tokens are different from access tokens? Because, well, they are in so many aspects. So the lifetime, we know that access tokens are pretty short-lived, could be dozens of seconds or could be minutes. Confirmation tokens will be very short-lived, 30 seconds maybe. Access tokens normally will be used multiple times, and confirmation tokens are of single use. Access tokens can be refreshed, confirmation tokens cannot be refreshed. As for scope, well, very roughly speaking, whilst access tokens give access to the entire API, or depending on the scope of the token, a confirmation token allows to perform a particular operation at a particular endpoint within the API. A little bit complicated, the next line about the session. So what I mean here is that the chain of access tokens would be normally associated with a user session that had been created at the moment of authentication. Confirmation tokens should have no sessions on their own, so they should be associated with a parent session. And finally, access tokens are used on their own, and it makes no sense using confirmation token on its own. It will always be used with an access token. Differences from step up. So in step up, access token is replaced, with a different ACR. And with the confirmation token approach, access token is retained or refreshed with an equivalent access token. And so the parts that are upgraded or in the confirmation token, compared to access token, the parts will be scope and scope in the classical case, and authorization data in the RAR case. Now, what people currently do, as usual, they do crazy things. At BitBase, we're using Keycloak as a core of our authentication product. And so in order to emulate this behavior, we're starting a separate full-fledged authentication session in Keycloak. So don't ask me how people pass access token in a request to authorization endpoint. In order to indicate that we are requesting confirmation token, we're using custom scopes. We are trying to reduce the scope of the resulting token using BB deny. It's like a special scope. That means you can do nothing with this token, except that particular operation. So we then passing it as a custom header, and the token is revoked immediately after use. So what we can do better? First of all, there is no standard way we can do it in OAuth currently. So what I'd suggest, the first step, how does the resource server indicate that the access token is not enough, that we need something else? I suggest using 403 forbidden. we already use this return code and authenticate, for example, in Depop, in the situation where everything is fine with access token. And if Depop proof is invalid, we're using like the same construct. I suggest new error code, confirmation required. I like then the scope parameter indicating the like desired scope. Surprisingly for me, the raw specification doesn't have an equivalent of invalid scope from bearer token. So this proposal will try to fill in the gap like authorization details parameter. Now, for the scheme parameter, I don't like, frankly. But if we want to be flexible and allow access token and confirmation token using different schemes, like one being bearer and another one being Depop, we probably need that parameter. Because don't go there. Yeah. This one will always refer to the access token, to the scheme used by access token, even if everything is okay with access token. Yeah, we could have used it for confirmation token, but it's an easy way to break the clients, I think. So if we like want to be that flexible, probably we'll need the scheme parameter. But I feel so tempted just to drop it and require that access token and confirmation token use just the same scheme always. Now it's time to request the confirmation token from the authorization server. So I don't know if we could do that without introducing like custom parameter, like confirmation too. We need some means to indicate the authorization server that the confirmation flow should be selected. It could be different from the like standard authentication flow. Now the second part is even worse. So I'm here suggesting a custom and a new grant type. If anyone has ideas how we can avoid that, you're very welcome. So the confirmation code grant type is sort of bastardization between authorization code and refresh token. Why? Because we need to issue an access token and confirmation token simultaneously because they are dependent. If we do that, we can enforce cryptographic binding of a confirmation token to an access token via a hash, and also ensure their life cycles are synchronized and that a new access token doesn't expire before confirmation token. Otherwise, the client will need another refresh, and there could be no cryptographic binding. And also a new parameter in the token response confirmation token. So what's inside? Type CT plus JOT. Hi, Brian. Another one. And so here I just wanted to demonstrate that its confirmation token could be Depop bound as well. Yeah, the CNF section. And I'm suggesting a new claim called use, just to indicate the allowed number of uses for the token. And finally, this is how we use those two tokens together by introducing a new header called confirmation. This is to demonstrate that potentially access token and confirmation token could be using different schemes. One could be bearer and another could be Depop, or not. So this is an open question. So if we're defining one-time or like limits to use tokens, how should introspection behave in this case? I believe it should only work once if the use is equal to 1. Because in the case of opaque tokens, is the only way to validate it. And probably we could also have a parameter like uses left. When we started discussing that on the mailing list, there were some concerns about, first of all, authorization server becoming like a big brother and getting details on the transaction from the scope of authorization details response. Yes, I would agree, but we already making exceptions for the first-party deployments. Yeah, like in Aaron's first-party apps. In this case, it's not just first-party apps; it's first-party everything. Yeah. So when authorization server and resource server and client application, when they are both, when all of those are like developed and deployed and controlled by a single party, and I think we can make an exception. So it's like safe to share that information. Also, we can, if it's a first-party deployment, we can think about integrating with Aaron's first-party apps just from the very beginning. Of course, we're not trying to reinvent 3D Secure. It's just an attempt to do a similar thing with like OAuth means. And finally, there's an appendix. There's another class of objects that is, it's not going to be part of this draft because so I've borrowed this terminology from Keycloak. It's used there. So action tokens are used like in constructs like magic links. If you need to password reset. So why I'm saying that it's not going to be part of the draft because they're not delivered as part of any OAuth flow. They're normally delivered using methods, alternative channels like emails or QR codes. So yeah, email confirmation and invitation, for example, organization. They're also different from confirmation tokens. So action tokens could be very. I think we have to wrap up. Okay. We can just borrow some ideas from confirmation tokens. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to switch over to Neil so he can quickly run through it before we go into the queue. Neil.
Hi guys.
Great. I will flash up the slides. What would you like to do then?
No, you put them up. That's great.
We can't hear you.
Hello, hello.
Say something again, Neil.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Oh man, what's the problem here? The slides are there, but we don't hear anything. Is a Meet echo thing?
Yeah, it's a Meet echo thing. I've tagged him. He's coming up in the transcript though, so if he presents, we can just read it. Awkward.
It's very awkward. Yeah. Okay.
So there's no audio in the room, is that?
Yeah. What should we do? Remote attendees can hear. Yeah. We have to read the transcript. Neil just talk and we read the transcript. Keep it short.
Yeah. So Neil Madden, most of you should know me probably. So Dimitri talked about one-time tokens, and this was a topic that interested me for a long time, especially when I was at ForgeRock. And we did some work around using macaroons to implement these kind of tokens. And so I haven't really thought about this for a long time because it felt like open banking and that kind of world moved on. But I present some of the kind of things we were working on and some of the lessons, I'd say, that maybe we can apply to any kind of work in the working group on that topic. So first of all, with respect to the Notewell, some of this work was covered by patents. When I was at ForgeRock, they were in the pre-IPO phase of patenting everything and building up their patent portfolio. So there are some patents that cover some of this stuff. They are now owned by Ping. So talk to Brian if you want to get them to waive them. So I haven't got time to run through what macaroons are, but the basic idea was that you would have a normal initial OAuth 2 flow for a long-lived access token and refresh token. So that on Dimitri's slides, it has all those properties of being long-lived. You can refresh it and all those kind of things. And that authorizes the client to initiate transactions, to start them. So start a payment request or something like that. And the access token has something called a third-party caveat attached to it, which says in order to use that access token, you must go to this third-party service to get what's called a discharge token. And then you present both your access token and the discharge token to be able to authorize the transaction. And the discharge token is bound to a specific transaction. So the access token you can use over and over again, but the discharge tokens are specific to a particular transaction. So this is a kind of diagram of it. So you have this initial OAuth2 flow as normal, using whatever flow. And then for each transaction, you go to some other kind of transaction authorization service, which does the same kind of thing as OAuth2 of obtaining user consent, and then it issues a discharge token. I've put those as separate in this diagram, but they could be combined. So you might just have this as another endpoint on the AS. And then once that discharge token is issued, then you can go to your payment service or whatever kind of transaction you're doing and present both tokens to authorize the transaction. And one of the nice things about having the long-lived OAuth2 token as well as these individual discharge tokens is that from a user point of view, you've got this long-lived representation with the client, and you can revoke their access at some times. If they're spamming you with requests for transactions all the time and things, you can revoke their ability to do that. So there's some quite nice things, I think, around that, around consent. So without the macaroons stuff, I think what this boils down to is treating these one-time tokens as more like something like depot proofs than as like access tokens. But rather than the client having its own private key, which it produces these proofs, it's kind of that key is like held in escrow by some other third-party service, and the client has to keep going back to that service to get a new proof every time it wants to do something, which adds the ability then for that service to kind of authorize with the user. And behind the scenes, this is all just HMAC basically. So you have a little HMAC key in your confirmation key or whatever, and then it can be decrypted and used to sign the discharge token. And so the other thing we did as well with those, when we were looking at this, was we didn't need any additional state. So because these weren't access tokens, we weren't storing them in the AS, and they didn't need any state anywhere. And so the whole flow was kind of stateless. And in particular, we just had it so that the proof, this discharge token, would be tied to a specific transaction via the kind of transaction details, which would typically already contain some kind of unique identifier, such as Stripe's idempotency key. So they have a unique ID in each request, and then if that request fails for any reason, you can replay it without risk of it going through twice. And I think that's another important thing to think about with these one-time use tokens, with what Dimitri was saying about using introspection endpoints for that and making it one-time use only. You've got the issue of what happens if that introspection response gets lost in the network for whatever reason. And so you can just bind this transaction token to an existing unique ID for that transaction, either a hash of it or the actual thing. We also did some work around like a generic sort of HTTP version of this. When you were kind of updating a resource, that was your transaction you were doing like a put to update a HTTP resource. So you could use the tag and the if matches header to kind of restrict it to the specific version of the resource. So that was kind of some more or less garbled thoughts on how I think if we're going to do one-time tokens, some ideas. So I'd say, although superficially these things look similar, actually there's a huge amount of differences between one-time authentication and normal OAuth. And then also then the permission to initiate these kind of one-time transactions is often itself something that should require consent. So often with the history of phishing and things like that, being able to get some kind of screen up on a user's device saying, hey, do you want to transfer some money? You know, that's half the battle is lost by the point you can do that. So having some initial explicit authorization for that part is really useful. And then so thinking about this more in terms of the way we've thought about proof of possession as something you layer on top of normal OAuth2 rather than something you use OAuth2 itself for. Anyway, that's pretty much all I've got to say on this. So I'll wrap it up and people can ask questions.
Yep. Thanks, Neil. Mike. So we have a few minutes for questions. Obviously, this is a brand new topic, requires more discussion. So it's more like here's some ideas, here's some problem description rather than anything else.
Yeah, Mike Johns, about the previous presentation, I neither know what a confirmation token is nor an action token. So it's really hard for me to parse what the purpose of the work would be.
So the problem, if I understood correctly, and maybe if someone else can summarize, is you have a one-time use of a token. That's sort of like the issue here.
Why is that called a confirmation token?
Give it any name. Go to the microphone. Not any name. Take that back immediately.
Joseph Heenan. I think we just have to be a little bit careful about the definition of one-time use here. Certainly the suggestion that introspecting a token would remove a use seems entirely dangerous, probably. Certainly what we've seen in open banking ecosystems is that the requests do need to be idempotent. There does need to be the ability for the client to retry a payment request if it doesn't go through the first time. So having to get another token to do that would not be good.
Peter, please get to the microphone already ahead of time so we can sort of... Oh, the note taker goes to the microphone, so...
So we have two.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not sure I get all the context of the confirmation and action and one-time use tokens. I'm curious, Dimitri, if you've, I know we've spoken about transaction tokens in the past. You mentioned one of the things that you're looking at is reducing scope. That's kind of what you can do with transaction tokens as well. And I'm curious to just figure out how you think about transaction tokens in the context of some of this as well.
Interesting thought, Peter. Yep. And yeah, Justin.
On Schuster, I didn't spend much time thinking about this before, but I have a question, and probably the room can rip my head off afterwards. But why not use short-lived access token and deduplicate on the server side? Because all the stuff is already there. You can initiate scope and like consent and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Richer. Previously at this working group, I presented a concept of presenting multiple access tokens in a cryptographically bound structure. Token buckets, I called it, because I'm terrible at naming things. I'll get Brian to name it for me. It'll be fine. In any case, what I'm really saying is that this is a topic that is coming up a lot more recently. We're seeing it in Whimsy as well, where the differentiation between like the Whimsy identity token and the initial access token and anything representing the workload itself are all kinds of different things floating around. So I think that's something that we, and by we I mean as a larger community, not just the OAuth working group, really need to start thinking about getting away from this model of everything is an access token and we cram it all into there because we have a header for it already.
Yogesh?
Hi, Yogesh. My question is very similar to the gentleman here. Why create token inside a token inside a token? I mean, doesn't we just trying to create a mess? Just keep one token, elevate the permissions, or change that characteristics for the time which you allow special access, and then bring it, fall it back down. It's probably a way of better doing it rather than token inside a token inside a token.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. George, quick.
I guess I didn't see these as tokens inside tokens. I saw this as basically security elements that say I need a special token for this particular transaction purpose. You could do that by asking for a new access token that you've downscoped and potentially provided some additional context into. We don't tend to use that method very often. At least I have not seen a lot of people using the concept of downscoping tokens to get a very specialized access token. that would be another option we would have here. But I do think there are cases where this ability, I was thinking a little bit about, like, you go to TSA and some of the lines, if you're TSA pre, they basically give you a special token that's one-time use that you present to somebody that lets you go through the TSA line versus something else. And they've already checked all the rest of your tokens in the process. And maybe that's not a perfect metaphor here, but I do think that this is a need. But it's more of, for the security of the event, I want an additional proof that this person is authorized to do it. That's in a one-time context, and you might be able to do that with Demscope.
Aaron, last words.
I do think there. Oh, hi, Aaron Parecki. I do think there's something interesting here. I did originally have the same question as Arndt about, like, can we just use access tokens? And normally I would say yes, but I think that the key is if the client actually needs to do something differently in order to make this work, then it makes sense to actually have this be a different construct. But if the client didn't need to do anything different, then we shouldn't make the client do something different. So if the intent is very much to get the client to ask the user for consent, for example, to get this one-time token, then it kind of starts to make more sense to have this be a separate thing. But I think there's definitely some more stuff to explore here.
Yeah, I think from what I hear is like, maybe we need to start to write down a document, or we, in sense of the interested parties, to present the problem, to make the problem clear, because I think we immediately jump into the solutions and then get lost in the solution, and then wondering, like, what are the tokens actually mean? What is the problem? Like, what's the difference to what we already have, and so on. So I think we, if we get that, we can also lump it into one of the intro meetings and go from there. And with that, I would like to thank you. Just one small thing. So in case you've been wondering, we had some presentations about email and OAuth earlier this year. Those things haven't gone away. The chairs in the background have worked with the authors and with the working group chair of mail maintenance to get that work over there, because as previously noticed, we have a lot of work in OAuth. And we can't do everything here, so we basically outsourced it over there. And they are going to work on it, but they will come back with a request for review at some point in time. So hope we can then, maybe beginning of next year or middle of next year, get some folks to review their work, and hopefully everything is fine and they can just finish the work as planned. Just as background. Okay. And with this, I would like to thank you for all the contributions, for the discussions, and specifically the note takers for recording all the conversations and actions. And we're going to see each other at the virtual intro meetings, and then hopefully also in Bangkok, the next IETF meeting. Anything? No. Okay. I think